I'd like to start, of course, I'm very excited about the Climate Conservation Corps proposal and the concept. I think it has captured the imagination of the American people, and it is certainly a program that in the American West we desperately need. I represent the state of Colorado, which, as the ranking member knows, has experienced devastating wildfires. My district last year was home to the first and second largest wildfires in the history of Colorado. I represent a district that's 52% federal public land. So I know these issues well, and suffice to say that last year's wildfires, I think not just in Colorado, but across the West, and I know we have many members here from New Mexico, Utah, other Western states, it was a wake-up call for our communities, for our states, and for policymakers to embark on plans that would meet the moment. And I believe this particular proposal meets the moment. Now, I also think it's important, and I'm excited because every witness, I believe, on this panel agrees and concurs that climate change is a threat and one that we need to take seriously. Mr. Watkins, you wrote an article earlier this year, in June of this year, in Reason Magazine about wildfire risk, and there was a quote in there that I certainly concurred with, and I thought was spot on, which is that, quote, climate change has contributed to making many forests and other landscapes drier for longer, end quote. And you talked about the fact that given that it is created in the West, fire years and not just fire seasons, which is something that I often talk about in Colorado. Mr. Watkins, am I fairly describing your article? I know I'm taking one quote of that article, but are you still with us?
Yes, sir, absolutely. I mean, another big issue is that there are simply a lot more people and more homes in harm's way these days. But again, there are a lot of contributing factors, and this is obviously a huge problem that I think it's pretty evident there's a lot of bipartisan support and effort at figuring out ways to solve and mitigate this risk, for sure.
And your point is a valid one. The point that you make elsewhere in that article about building in the WUI, and we have that, experienced that in Colorado, I suspect, in some other Western states. I also think it's important, I thought your written testimony, Mr. Watkins, I went through it. It's well developed. I didn't agree with all the points, but it's clear that you spent a great deal of time evaluating the CCC proposals that are out there. And it doesn't strike me, and maybe you can clarify, that you necessarily oppose the creation of a CCC. I mean, as you said, our letter today with 80 colleagues acknowledges the existing core network. And I think in your written testimony, you essentially state that these programs have been effective in the past, and it seems like what you're driving at is what you describe as, quote, regulatory hurdles that make it difficult for forest restoration projects to be approved so that groups such as the CORE program can actually conduct the work on the ground. So what you'd like to see is some other changes, which I think the ranking member has mentioned, but that ultimately would enable the CORE to do more. Is that a fair description of your testimony?
I mean, I think it's clear that, the cores have been very good, as I mentioned, at getting people out on landscapes doing, boots in the mud conservation work. But again, sure, a lot of these underlying issues are potentially going to be obstacles or barriers, no matter who it is who's undertaking these efforts. So absolutely.
Well, I would just say this. I understand the concerns of some of my colleagues with respect to cost. And we perhaps have to agree to disagree on that particular point. But I would just encourage my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, and I would hope that they would see the hand that we have extended with respect to, as we're developing this program, the need to address some of these challenges that both sides of the aisle agree are necessary. I would encourage them to come to my district in Colorado, where the landowners, private landowners, and folks in the Forest Service will show you areas that are in desperate need of management, restoration, reforestation. And I hear that often from my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. And the proposals that we're discussing today would invest in that. That's what's exciting about it. And so I understand, again, ideological concerns perhaps with respect to the budgetary aspects of it, but I just, again, would hope that folks would be able to look at this with an open set of eyes and to really treat these, I think, issues with an open mind.